just click unmute, but please keep yourself muted otherwise. All right, James, go for it.
All right, guys, thank you so much. I appreciate everyone coming to the session and showing up on a Saturday morning. And I want to say I appreciate the folks who are unnamed and unknown that are keeping the internet running right now. And I appreciate Stanford Webcam for figuring this out and creating a new path forward for us that I think is really going to benefit the entire open source community and Drupal camps in something we've been looking for something new, and I'm hoping that this may be part of that. So thank you very much. I thought, as I've said to Aaron already, that given the nature of the conversation yesterday, that this presentation needed a bit of an update because it was written and proposed long before current events. And the idea behind this presentation is that when a disaster or an emergency happens, there are things you can do to be proactive, and that happens before the event. And then the event happens, and the only thing you can do at that point is be reactive. And a lot of the conversation was, reactive. So I wanted to make this update the presentation to be more timely for everyone. So instead of just Boy Scout content strategy, which is be prepared, which is the Boy Scout motto, we're going to add a Boy Scout merit badge, which is wilderness survival, which is kind of where we are now. And normally I would say that I would start off a presentation with a good introduction and say, there's a monster, and this is the way we have hope to deal with that monster. And I usually have to show how scary the monster is, except in this case, I think we kind of get it. So let me tell you a little bit about me. This is where you can find me, and that information will show up again at the end of the presentation for everybody for my contacts. And somebody from our community who expressed this quite well, yeah, life's gonna hit you in the head with a brick. And I want to talk about that, that idea just a little bit, because someone pointed out yesterday that I am fond of the Mike Tyson quote, and so is John Bicker, but that quote produces sort of a violent imagery, and that's what really made me think about changing the presentation to help show the difference between my experience, which I'm going to tell you about, and why that relates to my experience. And then, much like Rain's presentation yesterday of being aware of the differences between people, that my experience isn't a common experience and isn't what other people like. So that violent imagery from Mike Tyson, causes a cognitive problem. In the same way I manage UX on a website, I try to do the same thing in a presentation. So I've changed things up a bit. So let me tell you about my bricks. This is why I talk about emergency management, disaster recovery, and business continuity. I grew up as a farm kid, and I was a Boy Scout. So to me, that was normal, running around outdoors, getting into everything, and being surrounded by a lot of big, heavy, dangerous equipment and big, heavy, dangerous animals. To me, that was normal. I moved to the city, and only in recent years, now that I'm in a huge mega city like Los Angeles, have I got to understand that my understanding of these kinds of things as a background are not common, that people haven't grown up around a 2,000-pound Bramer bull and know to stay out of the paddock enclosure. You generally kind of sense that, most people do, but still, sometimes you got to tell somebody. So that means I've actually done, it took me a while to realize with my own context. I've done fire rescue. I've done emergency planning. I'm a trained rescue diver. I've gone on search and stuff. I've done tornado recovery and rescue, looking for survivors in rubble, and then hurricanes. So those things intersected with doing healthcare work, healthcare administration and hands-on healthcare, and doing support for planning for emergencies, and then afterwards the recovery. I was at Katrina for ground zero. I was growing my own company, and there was a 5-year recovery period, and that's one of the things I want to help highlight for all of us today. I'll get to that in a minute. And I will say that this isn't a presentation about me at all, and normally I do not talk about Katrina, because it's difficult for people to understand, and that's upsetting as someone who values communication, that I cannot communicate. And it seems like a waste of time. But now there's a context for people that can understand. And that context is that it's not the destruction from the hurricane, it's the systems that are damaged, routines, logistics, commerce, normalcy. And the result of that, all those bricks is realizing, my cousins helped point it out, dude, you've got PTSD, you've got to get some support, which is what I did after the hurricane. And the events of that stress meant cortisol, as a byproduct hormone, and I put on 80 pounds after the event. The picture, the thin picture is, let's see, 15 months prior to the event, and the picture of me water skiing is a year after. So, and the weight was still going up. As you can see here, this was me, November without the mustache, and then in 2008. So I was up to a full 85 pounds. And part of that was because of the stress and not having an awareness of it. It's this insidious thing that creeped up, but it did creep up pretty fast, to the extent that if we talk about today, how does this show up? Again, the damage is systems, routines, logistics, commerce, and the damage to normalcy. And what causes stress are the unknowns and uncertainty. And then when this started, I put on 8 pounds in a week and quickly had to adjust how I was eating. So I want to surface that as understanding that when we're talking about business continuity, business recovery, disaster recovery, one of the factors to consider is not just how much of the business, how much of the continuity, how much of the disaster, you are a factor. And so is everyone else. And so is their ability to manage stress and deal with stress, and what their individual response to it is going to be. And that is the variable that's going to show up again and again. And I'm about to get into that a bit more. There is good news. This is why, in terms of how did this event strike me the same way? This is why, because this is what Katrina looked like. All of a sudden, I'm hit with the same cues, the same levels of uncertainty. And it was impossible not to respond in the same way. When you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you overeat. It's a natural human tendency. One of the first things you learn as a physical being is, gee, my stomach hurts. Mommy fed me something, I felt better. And the human mind is this abstraction machine. It's great at it. So it abstracts to, oh, when I don't feel good, I eat and I feel better. But it doesn't distinguish between physically not feeling good and emotionally not feeling good. And we quickly learn to treat our emotions with food. It's the most common thing in the world. So that's what was happening after Katrina. The kind of food that was available was just like this. The only thing left on the shelf was cookies, junk food, the kind of thing I don't eat anymore, which is how I was able to lose weight. I lost 100 pounds in the last few years to regain my health, but the stress puts it back on. So that's what I wanted to highlight, is consider yourself in the process here. And as I said, when we started, when you're talking about a disaster event or an emergency event, the difference is the degree of the event and the duration of the event. So this is a disaster event. And one of the problems is the uncertainty. How long is it going to last? What's the information? Part of why we're talking here is that as website builders, managers, and content managers, we're distributing that information. We're managing that information. We're updating that information. But that takes a process, and being aware of where the landmines are in that process is something I want to help highlight for you in order to be more proactive, the first column. And then I wanted to also increase how much I'm talking about being reactive. So fundamentally, those are the two strategies you have. And at the bottom of the slide here, you see the two kinds of risk exposures you have from each strategy. For being proactive, there's there's failures on our part, there's failures on the part of the systems we work for. And there are many examples of this. And when you look at history, when you talk about the space shuttle accident in '86, there were engineers who tried to warn management, you shouldn't launch under these conditions, it's too cold. But management failed to act. And that type of example happens over and over again. NASA does a very good job of saying, when we make a mistake, we absolutely have to learn from it because the downside risk is too high. When it comes to a reactive strategy, the risk exposure is a failure to understand what's going to happen once you put your hands on the system and once you're in an event and where it will fail, because you don't know until you put a system under pressure. And in many forms of engineering that are more physical in nature than software engineering, than web engineering, we build models and you get to see how something functions. When you build a model, you get many more insights into how it will function and what it's going to do and can improve it. You think of anything physical, there's a prototype, and from that they make improvements. Our work is very analogous. We have test environment, a staging environment, and a production live environment, the exact same way. It's just not as obvious that that's what we're doing because it's such a habit and it's so fast, but that's exactly what we're doing. In this case, it's not just the code, it's not just the messages, it is the process and the system. And that's another thing I want to help highlight for us today, is that thinking that, oh, I've just got to produce content. Yeah, you do, but that content comes through a system. Who has to give the approvals for that content? Does it have to be translated? If it has to be translated, how many more steps is that going to go through? At each step, how much more uncertainty is added? It's not that the domino falls. Everyone expects, okay, yeah, you live on the Gulf Coast, you live in New Orleans, you're in Hurricane Alley. Why don't you expect a hurricanes? Well, of course I do. And I've got a hurricane evacuation kit. But it's not the first domino that falls. It's the second and the third and the fourth that you weren't necessarily thinking about directly that make the event so impactful and start to have problems. Yeah, I had gas in the car and I was able to evacuate, but I didn't know I was going to evacuate for as long as I did. And I put my hands on a few things as I walked out the door and thought, oh, I won't need that with me, but I'll put it on a top shelf so at least it'll be dry in case, just in case. And I was very lucky that those things did survive the storm in my absence, but I had put my hand on my passport, my birth certificate, and my social security card. And by a miracle, my apartment was spared, but literally 50 feet on either side of me were destroyed. So I'm very grateful that I had that experience, but I felt guilty to stand around amongst my neighbors who were suffering even more than, anyway. It's the second and third domino, which means as you think about what's going to happen and what your strategy is to be proactive, try to think a few dominoes ahead and how to stop them. Because what happens is we try, as an event happens, we see the dominoes falling and we try to catch that last one. We try to catch that last one, and you're constantly playing catch up to the dominoes. If you review disasters, and I recommend it if you're going to do this kind of work and do this kind of planning, which I also recommend doing, you see the sequence of events that produce the kind of disasters that you hear about, like Chernobyl, like Fukushima, and so many others, become chasing the next problem, chasing the next problem. If there's a way to stop the dominoes from falling, you can start to get ahead. In this event, the kind of thing that we're talking about with an epidemic, medical professionals have pointed out that your response is to data that is already a little bit old. So the response is more tepid than is actually needed. And you're constantly playing catch up, which is why the response turns so draconian. I forgot to mention that currently another reason my response to this is very personal is that I've been helping support healthcare administration again for messaging out to patients and seeing how the processes have broken down. Days have turned into 12 to 18-hour days, getting approvals through the messaging process, getting translations, getting delivery of flyers, making decisions, which medical clinics are going to be open, which medical clinics are going to be closed, realizing that if, and getting information to covered patients by saying, if you think you have symptoms, stay home unless you are this kind of person that is at risk. And if you are, go to this facility. If you're just someone who really needs medical attention, don't go there and you're healthy, because you might be exposed. Go over here. Realizing all those needs. And that's a reactive strategy that happens once an event happens. Very difficult to plan and very difficult to expect. And very difficult to get support for, because when assigning a budget for your time, the people that make decisions ask, what's the probability of that event? I think it's very low versus this risk exposure over here. That's a natural business decision. And given that's another risk factor, that's an environmental risk factor here. So this is where I want to start highlighting some of the good reasons to be prepared and how to be prepared. This is a long, very old quote, and it's very, very true. And it points out that being trained, and in our case, practice or simulations or drills, help you manage the situation a great deal more. And as engineers, it's incredibly basic to say, look, you can't tell where the leaks are until you pressurize the whole system. And once you do, this pinhole leak shows up, and that pinhole leak shows up, and that pinhole leak shows up. Well, maybe one pinhole leak you can survive, but you've probably got a lot more than that. And the summation of them means you don't have the flow at the end of the process that you expected to have. And that becomes the next domino, the next problem, and you've got to chase them backwards. One of the things you have to do is plan for things to go wrong. You make a plan, and then as part of that plan is say, at which point are the intersections? What am I saying? This is going to happen and this is going to happen. Your plan B, your plan C, your plan D, you need to say, suppose that doesn't happen, and that, and that, and that. This takes also some practice in planning, of the skill of planning, because I have had to stand toe-to-toe with PhD MDs in medical laboratories who are very busy and do not like my annoying questions for their contingency planning. Don't like taking the time for that. They've got more important things to do. And as they've said, oh, I'll just, I'll call the graduate student, he'll come in and he'll take care of it. And my response is, that's a lot of assumptions. What if the phone doesn't work? That's ridiculous. The power can go out and the cell phone's got a battery. It's fine. It's like, sure, that cell phone has a battery, but that cell tower does not. What if that phone doesn't work? And playing what if with these guys, it just annoys them. So it's a skill to practice having that conversation and making those plans, which is why being proactive about doing this helps, because it leaves you behind the 8 ball, behind the curve when you don't. And the actual event happens, and being reactive to all the things that somebody assumed would work and didn't. In that example, I had to do the planning for the biochemistry department at Vanderbilt University for a loss of power event. I was very lucky that I could get people's attention because Cornell University had recently had an event where someone assumed that the gas tank in the backup generator was full, and it wasn't. And when power went out, the temperature and all the freezers came up, and they lost decades of work, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of research was gone and irreplaceable. And that event scared the daylights out of these guys, and that helped me get their attention. So that was in my favor. But without such an event, you've got to rely on negotiating skills and interpersonal skills to get the information you need. Right now, people may be more responsive and receptive to having the imagination to see, oh, that's what that would be like. And in that imagination, it's not the probability that something will happen. It's if it did, the downside risk is this. Is that acceptable? The probability of losing those freezers was low, but when it does happen, losing 10 years worth of research, losing cell lines that were irreplaceable for research, that they said, oh, that's an unacceptable risk exposure at any probability of occurrence. And that helped have that conversation. So this is a moment to harvest that emotional input. Another hazard that can show up in making your disaster recovery and contingency planning is this great quote from Jerry Brown. Everybody loves to do planning, and it feels like you're doing something, but you're not. So be mindful of not letting that happen. I'm a big fan of Peter Drucker, a management guru, and he underlines the point for Jerry Brown as well. You've got to move the team, move the stakeholders past their promises into actual commitment. And remember, the plans have deadlines, benchmarks, measurable things. Drucker's also famous for saying things that get measured, get managed, and improved. If you don't make measurements, you're not going to improve anything. And Chris Voss is fond of saying that hope is not a strategy. Once you pressure test a system, it's like lemon juice. It will find every paper cut. And I really recommend it. It'd be the things you haven't thought of. Just like, when you put your hands in the pickle jar or something, you go, oh, I didn't realize I had cut my hand. And maybe as a farm kid, where we pickled vegetables and I'm playing with, tractors and stuff and I have nicks on my hands and not realizing it, maybe that's more unique to my experience than most folks. But I think you've put on hand sanitizer at least once and gone, ow, that kind of stung. That's the idea. And putting it this way is a great way to get buy-in from management to say, look, we have to run the system through and see what's going to happen and find the unknown unknowns and breaking it down into that kind of language. What are our known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, unknown unknowns, gives management a tool to wrap their head around it. So these are some of their most important steps. Again, this was part of the presentation as written to be proactive, what to do ahead of time. So you have to make things happen. You have to be relentless about it, and it will take time. One of the disasters and emergencies that I've had to work on has been protecting PHI and people's private health information, people's social security number, as part of a healthcare organization, and talking to them over and over about levels of security. And this is a difficult conversation because I'm talking to them as a web engineer and they are the IT department. They're used to hardware. They're saying what they know about the vectors of attack into the system. They're talking about the hardware a lot. And I'm talking about the risk exposure and repeated attacks over time. We kept having the in-house server and the web server. They were in the same room and they were side by side, and IT insisted on self-hosting. And their solution was, this is secure because this is a completely different server, different stack than this one. And I kept telling them the things I keep hearing and learning at every conference and at every convention, just blow my hair back about how people have gotten in ways that I hadn't even thought of. And that's the point, is it's secure until it's not. And then when it's not, that risk exposure has happened. And that's when management says, oh, yeah, that was an unacceptable risk exposure at any level of probability. The problem to overcome is their perception of that probability and telling themselves they're certain this is not something to worry about. So they've stopped listening, which is why I try to highlight step number one. You have to be relentless until action happens. And I give you the examples of servers because it did take me 7 years to get them to accept we're going to go to cloud-based web hosting, where none of the PHI data is part of the website at all, and it's not even in the same building as the secured server. There's no way to find a wire connecting one to the other. That took 7 years. and 7 years of relentless work. Step 2, remember that the thing that's going to be damaged in an emergent event is going to be the system, the process. And you need to be able to adapt that process and have backups to the process and adjust. Also remember that the difference between an emergent event and a disaster level event is the degree of severity, the size and scope of the physical area affected, and the duration of the event. It is 15 years ago, talking about an active shooter event was very rare. And I'm very sad to say that that's more common these days. As someone who works at school, some people who work in healthcare, like me, it became apparent that we needed to be able to have information and websites to throw up in that short-term, very local emergent event to give people information. And some of that information was, we don't know what's happening, but we're trying, we'll update you as fast as we can. And that helps reduce the level of anxiety where I gain weight, because it reduces uncertainty and reduces unknowns for people that are looking to you for information. And trying to solve that content and how does it look will become a chaotic process, because you will be habituated to the process you've always done. And the surest way to create more chaos in a chaotic event is to be locked into the old process that is not going to function in the same way. It's going to be much more rocky, and that's going to add turbulence. So having that content available and having the ability to, for example, in a hurricane, people were evacuated. I can log in by phone and the web administrator can activate that page and turn it on, can turn other pages off. For the most part, we're pretty aware of that, but making the content ahead of time gives you the chance to use your normal processes and do the refinement that you may be wanting to do, that in an emergent event will become noise in the process, because someone as a habit will say, but we have to send this for review. We have to send that to design. No, you don't. You don't need to brand a message that says nuclear fallout, run that way now. You don't brand that, but somebody with authority will block the process and create noise. And as engineers, we like getting things done. We're usually not the people in charge of that as much. So the more you can train the people that you do work with and you work for to be mindful of that, will help that moment and help you get through it. And the third most important thing is, as I've been saying, pressurize the system, test it, learn from it, and optimize it, because you will, and do so again and again. It has to become a drill. This thing is a skill, which is why I use the quote in the beginning, that you will not rise to the level of expectations, but you will fall to the level of your training. This is the training. Drill the system. Practice it. Not just the phone tree. Okay, we got everybody on the phone. What if the phones don't work? You've practiced one path, assuming that path works, assuming that the people are available. In a tornado event, people are buried in rubble. Yeah, their phone works fine. They just can't get to it. What good was testing that phone tree? In an earthquake event, will be very similar. So it's the things you don't think of that become the next domino, the next domino, the next domino, that are going to trip you up. And the only way to see those and start to be proactive for them and reduce that downside risk is to routinely drill the system, pressurize it, and you start to have a model in your hands and you see what shows up. You get more insights and you run it again. A good example of this in, the late, some time ago, I guess late 80s, from time to time, the weather, what's called the freeze line, which normally is around Nashville, and that's the line at which rain above, or that line comes down as ice and snow, and rain below that just comes down as rain in the winter. Well, it'll bounce around, it'll move. And when we have these Arctic storms, it gets pushed really far south. So it gets pushed as far south as Birmingham, Montgomery, and rarely as far as New Orleans. Birmingham, Alabama had experienced an ice storm, and it just shut down the city. Well, they said, we're going to learn from this. And they did, and they got some equipment and they staged it, and they managed to optimize their budget to get equipment that could be dedicated for this, but largely unused. Not a popular political decision to fund, but they did it. And the next ice storm that happened, they were ready, and they went out and they had downtown Birmingham cleared by morning. You could get to work, you could get to the market, and still the streets are empty because someone went, no one can get to downtown. We didn't clear enough roads. They thought they understood where the leaks were going to be in the system that they had fixed, and they did fix the ones they saw. They just didn't see the next ones or the next ones. The fact that ice storms cause trees to fall down, branches to break and hit power lines and knock those down. Hurricanes do the same thing. They knock bridges out. You won't be able to get to where you think you're going to get to for one reason or another. And it's the next thing and the next thing. So there's an example of people that we drilled the system, we were prepared. Not quite. In the hurricane events, you'll see that the state police have learned over and over, okay, we're going to turn all of the freeways in the South, we call them interstates, into exit only and all through town. And then they realized we just created a bottleneck at the edge of town and massive traffic jam in town. New Orleans is a city of 500,000 people. Los Angeles, where I live now, the metro statistical area from Malibu, Oxnard down to Orange County out to San Bernardino is about 22 million people. Imagine all those people in the car on the road at once. Even if you make the freeways exit only, remember that we're surrounded by mountains. There's only about 3 major arteries to get out of here. And you're again making the bottleneck. So the state troopers in Louisiana thought, we're smart, we're gonna extend our contraflow for evacuation routes 10 miles out the city. All you did was extend the bottleneck. And who needs to go the other direction anyway? Nobody. So again, adapting the plan and seeing the next domino fall in the level of planning. And that's a great example of you fail to the level of your training. Those are the most important 3 steps. And in those, I love this quote from Tulip Bankhead. If I had my whole life to live over again, I'd make these same mistakes only sooner. And that's the point of the drilling. That's the point of the practicing. You get to see the mistakes. You get to see them faster. The Agile community embraces this. Fail fast. That's exactly the same thing. This is just a different level of abstraction of the very same idea. And I'm hoping that that kind of language and that kind of concept can help you sell this to your management and to your team. We're doing the exact same thing. We're achieving the exact same results. We're refining the product and making the end result better, making the goal work. So this is the part where I want to talk about some of the hazards, and some of the hazards I've mentioned are the leadership in front of you that doesn't say, well, the probability that's very low. There's a great quote from Tolkien. If you live near the Misty Mountain and smog is in there asleep, you might want to consider that before you go poking the bear, because of this. This is the nature of so many disasters that you can study, that what failed wasn't the event. The first thing you hear on the news was, no one thought of this. And the next thing you hear on the news is someone say, yeah, I thought of that, and I told you so, and you didn't listen to me. And you go back through history and you see that exact same sequence of events again and again. The walls of Constantinople stood for 1,000 years. And when some guy said, hey, we've invented this new thing, it's called a cannon. You want to buy it? He said, no, what do I need that for? Well, the other side bought it and the walls came down because he failed to imagine what this would do. And the world changed. Same thing happened in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Somebody smart said, we've lost track of the Japanese fleet. One of the things that could happen is they could come here. And everyone said, don't be ridiculous. The next person in charge said, your job is now to make sure I always listen when you warn me. You see this pattern again and again. It's a lack of imagination. It's a lack of the ability to remember that perhaps there's a dragon, and from time to time that dragon may wake up and decide it's hungry and come knock on your house, see if you got anything good to eat. So there's different ways to use this idea. One is to simply present the idea. It depends on who you're talking to. An analytical person will probably get it. An assertive person may need to be walked through this. And an amiable person will want to have time to digest it. So consider how you negotiate this moment when you introduce this idea as a selling point for why it's important to start with those 3 steps. Take action, drill the system, recognize the system is the issue. At this point, I want to open us up for any questions. Real quick, I'm going to give credit to Slides Carnival for giving me a nice template. I wish I could claim credit for all this fancy graphic work, but it's not appropriate for me to do that. And that's where you can find me. Anybody have any questions? I cannot see the chat, but I think I can hear people if they open up their mics.
Also, James, I have the chat window open, so if anybody posts a question, I can read it out.
Thank you. Yeah, no, as the person giving the presentation, I'm seeing, oh, that's why moderators were reading questions. I can't see the chat window. Also, well, what can I say? I hope everyone's doing well during this experience. And for me, this experience is, again, very, very intense because of the long hours and the level of intensity of work. And I came to realize by listening to everybody in the conference, some people are sitting at home experiencing this very differently. They don't have the level of work, but their experience is, I'm bored, I'm not connected. And the fundamental experience is the uncertainty. And that causes damage to you, emotionally, psychologically, and physically. If you decide to be a Navy SEAL and go to training, one of the things, so many of the things they're going to do to you are stress testing. And one of the ways they do that is they wake you up first thing in the morning and they say, we're going for a run. And you go, how far? And you say, and they tell you, until I'm tired, until I say so. They won't tell you when. You say, for how long, how far? They won't tell you. That is because an unknown duration is the highest level of stress. And that's what they're trying to do to you. They know that. This is an event like that, which is why it's important to take time for self-care. My wife and I are doing yoga. I'm trying to manage the food better. Thankfully, the grocery store got something in besides cookies for me to eat. And I'm trying to get the bad eating and overeating back under control. But my body's reacting with the cortisol again, just like it did in the past.
So we do have some content in the chat. Appreciate your passion and experience with extreme stress. Hey, what was that slide template design source?
Aha. Happy to give some credit. Slides Carnival. I was looking up the kind of, I put in a theme type and slide template into a Google search, and this was one of the things that came up, and it was one I liked.
Cool. I'll paste that URL into the chat. Let's see. These people really appreciate your presentation, James. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Just pointing out it's extremely timely.
I hope so. Yeah, I've been wrapping my head around giving a presentation. I'm used to public speaking, and we quickly changed to online, but I'm composing and seeing it in my head, standing in front of people and giving a presentation, and how do I make this point? How do I underline that? How do I say this? How do I remember to slow down when I talk? So, I don't just hit people with a fire hose. And it became apparent I need to adjust this presentation from all of that thinking and orienting to, this is where people are right now. What can I do to be helpful? And that's, as an overgrown Boy Scout, that's me. I love being helpful, and that's, I get frustrated when I want to be and I can't be. So I hope this has been supportive and helpful and gives you the idea, and at the very least, permission to remember to take care of yourselves and each other, and recognize that that is part of what needs to happen, not just updating the website, not just answering your boss, and that your boss needs it too. and here their boss needs it too. One
Yeah.
of the most profound moments in my experience was when the Red Cross came by after Katrina and just handed me food unexpectedly. I didn't know why, but in that moment I cried, because it was the first moment that someone had given me permission to stop and accept care, because there was just so much to do. That was an extreme event, and this is extreme in many ways, but not in that exact way. But it underlines the point that the thing I'd forgotten was to be able to take care of myself, because I'm just so used to work, work, work. And that comes from being a farm kid. There's so much to do every day. You get up and get busy. But in events like this, be mindful of that need for yourself and for your team, both vertically and below you.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed.
And then look to your neighbors. It's helpful.
I definitely noticed the need to socialize. I mean, not just work, but just talk to people. And Zoom's been super helpful with that, both with friends and coworkers.
Yeah, someone mentions the conversation keeps turning to the events of today, and that seems depressing. That's a difficult thing to balance. It was difficult talking about Katrina unless you were there. It was difficult to talk to because you can't relate to that event. This is an event people can relate to. So find a way to be able to talk about it so that you can manage what's happening and for yourself, and yet also not cause yourself more stress. That's not easy, but and not having pressurized this system, not having done this before, give yourself permission to do it wrong. Give yourself permission to make mistakes and accept that as part of what's happening. And if you need to say, can we talk about something else? Feel free to say that. And if you need to talk about it, ask, say, can we talk about this? And someone can say, I'm overwhelmed today. And you start to recognize where you each are. And just like Rain was talking about with neurodiversity, recognizing that in the moment there is neurodiversity. People are going to be at different levels, and you can.
Good point.
Are. Have I been a big wet blanket and everyone feels too depressed to ask questions this morning?
I don't think so. I mean, people have been posting their thanks. I think it helps to give perspective because you've been in a few of these events.
Yeah, it's taken a few of them to realize and recognize that even for myself, and recognize it took family to say, dude, you've got PTSD.
Yeah.
And my response is, no, I don't. And you know what I'm talking about. You're a jerk. And he's like, really? Let me hold a mirror for you. See what you look like when you say that. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's the nature of PTSD, is a brain that continues to fire the trauma circuits. Trauma is when you're made to feel helpless. This is an event where you feel helpless. Part of that helplessness is the unknown duration, unknown degree, unknown risk, and you feel helpless. And our biologies and our wiring are just really susceptible to that kind of injury. And that's why those circuits continue to fire. And that's the nature of PTSD. You worry about the monsters under the bed when there are none. And finding a way to help the brain turn that off. I like yoga a lot, which I have to say has been an awesome benefit about now living here in California on the West Coast, with a culture that embraces these things a great deal more than Louisiana does.
Sure. All right, I have to step out to get ready for the next session, but if people want to continue talking, this session will be open as long as you're in, James. If not, the lunch session is going to be open all day, so feel free to hop over there.
So what can I, thank you, Aaron, appreciate it so much.
Yeah.
What can I answer for people, specific questions or things you want to talk about, or resources you'd like to ask for, ideas you'd like to ask about? Jokes you want to tell me? Mustache critique you'd like to give me? Anything, really. I'd say I love Ann Palmer's got a great photograph here on her screen, because I keep looking over and seeing that nice big smile, and I appreciate that so much.
Hey, I have a question, which is, could you describe for us what your job is today and where you're working? I didn't get your employment situation clear.
Well, I'm not. I'm between jobs, but my wife works in healthcare administration, and we do tiny living. So you see, this is my office. That's the living room. That's my kitchen. That's my bedroom. And she's working at home, and I'm tech support, and also, supporting her process and going. It's midnight. You are exhausted. Let me make sure you've got food. Let me make sure you stop
Well,
and hearing. But previously, I was the uh, web strategist for LA Care for 4.5 years. Immediately, I was director of project management office for a small web company here in LA. Prior to that, I did financial management for healthcare. I did financial analysis for healthcare. I did medical planning for healthcare. I made a plan for an emergency event in Louisiana, and then got to evaluate how well that plan actually functioned. I was very pleased that the plan was easy to use and helped save lives.
nice. Thank you.
So yeah, I've fallen into healthcare administration support as more of a volunteer with professional experience as a web manager, as an editor, as a project manager, and as a family man, and seen so many of the same things I've seen in the past. But weird time to be looking for work, and yet at the same time, people are asking me about disaster recovery and business continuity a great deal more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allie. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about, I mean, I know we're talking about some large scale disasters, but I think probably what I deal with more are kind of the everyday like project contingency planning scenarios, like, maybe more along the lines of like when we're kind of doing a development project, we have like a lot of different stakeholders involved, we have the developers and our QA teams, and we're trying to like think about like what are the things that could go wrong in this project that would just not cause us to not deliver on time. Do you work in that area? Do you have any advice for running contingency planning meetings for that type of a scenario?
Yeah. You're going to stumble through a process and the limitations there that will produce a result. And that is going to be what's iterative for you in contingency planning until you can get the organization to support you on a much more dedicated, much more accepting of constant work of contingency planning. So I've done this so much. Rain pointed out yesterday that somebody who's autistic hyper focuses on details, that they zero in on them immediately. So when I look at plans, people ask me, how do you do this? I'm like, I don't know. I see that, weak point, weak point, weak point. It just shows up to me instantly. And that's through a lot of practice and exposure, which I took for granted. I mean, I'm nobody special. I'm just some farm kid, right? I assume my experience was like everybody's, and I didn't realize it's just not. And so you're going to get that too. As your experience grows, you'll learn to see things. And as you do, start to train the person you report to who trusts you as a subject matter expert, and they need your support and help. And they need you to train them to pay attention to, and to have the imagination of what can happen. Mm-hmm. And not just the probability of what can happen, but what the risk of failure what happens when failure happens. So when failure happens with the Challenger, 7 astronauts were unfortunately lost, but the probability of that was low. And when you're a business administrator, you listen to the finance people, and I've been that finance person who says the expected value is probability times value. That's expected value. You think that way, but you're the person going, okay, but I've got to manage a contingency plan that manages that risk exposure, no matter what the probability is. And being able to surface, put your probability aside and ask yourself, are you willing to risk the lives of 7 astronauts?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to get past the habitual thinking that says, but that's not going to happen. What if it did?
Right.
And that's the answer to your question is, are you familiar with root cause analysis in project management?
No, I'm not. I'm not technically a project manager, though I do think I'm probably the best person positioned. I'm our website operations manager. So it's, I work with a lot of processes, but I don't
Right.
have project management training the way that you're talking about.
Well, think about, yeah, a lot of people do mean project manager training when they say that. I don't. If you work on a project in my book, you're a project manager. And
Yes.
training or not, it's what you're doing. The root cause analysis means when something goes wrong, you ask, what's the root cause of this?
Mm.
And you try to remember there's a difference between a symptom and the cause. And what you're trying to do is root out causes so that you're not distracted by chasing symptoms. And so many of us have seen examples of chasing fire after fire after fire, only to get back to the first one that's on fire again. Didn't they put this out? You did. And if it's on fire again, it's because there's something causing it. You have chased a symptom that has recurred.
Okay.
Root cause analysis means you ask, why did something happen 5 times?
Okay.
And so if something happens, you say, why did that happen? Well, so-and-so didn't show up for work today. Why'd that happen? Well, they were sick. Why'd that happen? Or that's going to take you down a rabbit hole. It's going to be a dead end. That's when you recognize, okay, why wasn't someone covering that? We didn't have that process. Why didn't we have that process? Because we didn't think it through. Why didn't we think it through? Because we never drilled this process before. Why didn't we do that? Because we don't have a process that is dedicated to contingency planning and practicing contingency events.
Mm-hmm.
That was your root cause.
Yeah.
And now that symptom won't show up again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you can get around the financial wonks saying, but that's not cost effective. And another great quote from Peter Drucker is to show up and say, hey, you know what? Leaders, it's not just doing something right, it's doing the right things. And leaders are the people I trust to be making those choices to do the right things, because you ask managers to do something right for you and not make those choices and say that's above your pay grade. Fine, then lead us in the right direction. These are my 5 questions. This is the root cause analysis. So you can spend money chasing those symptoms, throwing good money after bad over and over and over and over, or you can stop the bleeding by spending twice as much as you want to once.
Mm-hmm.
But in your case, that's the sell. You're not going to spend it once. You're going to make this a new budget item. If you are not practicing and drilling this, you're waiting for the disaster to hit you and be unprepared.
Mm-hmm.
The most effective organizations in the world drill these events. So yeah, the root cause analysis of what are the risk exposures, at each risk exposure, what can happen? What can happen? What can happen? What if that doesn't work? Then we do this. What if that doesn't work? Then we do this. What if that doesn't work? Then we do this. Recognizing that like I was experiencing in the medical labs, the director said, I'll just call somebody. What if they're not available?
Right.
Well, okay, they're available. What if they can't get there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fine. What if they can get there and great, the cell phone has a battery, but your lab still doesn't have power? What do you expect them to do for you? How are they going to stop those coolers from raising in temperature and still losing it? So you got someone on the phone, you got them to the location, and they still couldn't do anything. Are you looking at all the degrees of failure, or are you brushing me off? Ask how it can fail 5 times. In that situation, that's another thing, is think of the math. The other person said, oh, I'm going to call this person. They're going to answer the phone. They're going to be able to relocate. They're going to be able to get on location and do something. That's 4 more variables you have just introduced into the equation. That they are not certainties. Those are 4 more speculations, 4 more points of failure you have just added. And yet you told me this is the answer. No, it's not. This is solid. No, it's not. by asking that why question, that how question in this case, 5 times. And being prepared for how it's going to be, thanks Anne, how it's going to be annoying to the person you're asking and they're going to want to brush you off.
Yeah.
I recommend studying negotiation skills. I recommend a guy named Chris Voss. His book is called Never Split the Difference. And he talks about negotiation skills. He's one of the most insightful writers and speakers on this subject I've found.
Thank you. I also have to go, but thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you for coming. Have a great camp, and reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, anywhere you like. Thanks. Thanks, Svetlana. Thanks, Tatiana. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go boom. We're going to see you guys in the next session.